KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Dagan Cincinnati Bowtie Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today, my friend. How are you?
I had a feeling that might be the one. It could have been Dagan Hood Rat.
Hood Rat, yeah.
Hood Rat Moriarty.
I actually wanted to use the cocktail one, but I just felt like you can't. I think we would get demonetized if I came right out and said that.
Right in the first 5 seconds. Why not go for it?
At least Cincinnati Bowtie, you got to go look it up.
Why does Ohio have all the dirty shit?
Yeah, Cleveland Steamers and
what's going on over there, man?
How you doing, my friend? Welcome to the show.
Everything's good. It's nice to take a little respite, right? I'm kind of working freelance right now, doing some designing, some animating. Nice. It's really, some days it's just nice to go and just have a conversation with my bro about something fun. I need a break.
Well, we will do that today, my friend.
Let's do it, man. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. I'm good. You know, weather's changing a little bit. It's getting a little hotter. We're getting into like central air weather, you know, where it just stays on forever. Yeah, but everything's good. It's just this, it's like day after day. NHL playoffs are happening.
That's
the
happening.
NFL
right
draft
now,
is soon. For when we're recording, it will have already happened when this publishes.
Yeah.
But things are happening. You know, just kind of hanging in there. But nothing new to report.
Nothing.
I have to be honest with you.
You following baseball at all right now?
A little bit, not really.
Yeah, I'm not really.
I look at the standings and see like how everyone's doing, but
yeah.
That's about as deep as it gets for me. I got kind of sucked into the hockey towards the end of the year and into the playoffs. The Islanders fired their coach last year, and I was really salty about it. Barry Trotz, who I thought was like maybe the best coach we ever had since Al Arbor. And they got rid of him, and I kind of was like, fuck the Island. Like, not permanently, but I was just like, fuck you guys. Like, I just need a year away from, like, I'll pay attention, I'll root for you, but it's like, I don't know why you did that. We were so engaged and so happy with this, and you just ruined everything. And then towards the end of the year, I was always looking at the box scores and standings and tuning in every once in a while, but I just get sucked into playoff hockey so bad, whether the Islanders are in it or not. And usually, traditionally in my life, they've been in it much more as I've gotten older. When I was a kid in my 20s, they never made it. In fact, they never made it. They never advanced in the playoffs from 1993 to 2016. And I think they made the playoffs from 1993 to 2016 like 3 times. Anyway, playoff hockey is going on. It's just like so good. So it's like a nice little respite, as you were saying. Like, just watch that at night, hang out.
Yeah, get into a routine with that. You'll be happy to know this, Kai. I meant to tell you this a couple of days ago. So we're in a hotel for Lilia's birthday, celebrating in New York City over the weekend. And Graydon and I, we're back from dinner, back from dessert. We're back, take a cab back to the hotel room. Nice hotel.
Did you take a real cab?
No, we Ubered around New York for the first time, and it felt odd. It felt really odd because I haven't worked in New York in, it's been over 2 years now for me. And then mostly, even at that point, I was largely from home, but I haven't really been in New York, in Manhattan, since the Uber thing really took off. I really haven't had the occasion to take an Uber in New York. So it was a strange fit. But we got back to the hotel room, and Graydon's really into basketball. And we were just finished. We caught the end of the Lakers-Grizzlies game. And Graydon's just surfing channels and hockey's on. And he was taking a really acute interest in it because he has no familiarity with the sport, really at all. I don't think he's ever paid attention to it. And he was watching it, and he was engrossed, eventually fell asleep. And then the next morning, he tuned in to ESPN, got caught up in another hockey game. And I think he never realized how violent it was with the fighting and stuff. And I think the next day he was watching highlights, not a proper game. And I saw him getting a little sucked into it. And I was like, oh man, his uncle will be kind of psyched that he's kind of, where it was a blind eye previously, now it's something new that he's discovered. So I thought that was kind of interesting because he really has no fandom outside of basketball at all. So
yeah, there is no hockey fandom in our family at all.
Nothing.
I somehow picked it up. I really think our neighbors who always come up were really influential on me, and I started playing when I was very young.
Yeah, you did.
So it just became, because hockey is one of those sports. People actually laugh about it. It was like, I might have been on the show or one of the shows where someone wrote in and talked about how his kid started playing hockey, and I was like, it's just too late. Like, like it's hard for people to start like Maddie plays men's league, like beer league hockey. And I had always thought he played like when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And I found out in one of the conversations, he's like, I started playing hockey in like my 20s. I'm like, what?
Oh shit. But he
That's
always
so
skated
rare. Maybe? I don't know what, where. It's just very, very, very rare. In fact, there's a commercial during the playoffs that I keep seeing. It's like a rent-a-car commercial or whatever, where there's like a little kid on the ice skating. He's like 2 years old or whatever. And then there's like a guy with a baby like strapped to him. And the guy walks up. He's like, oh, I guess hockey's not his thing, huh? Or whatever. Cause like it's so common to get kids. They say in Canada, you can get your kids on skates before they can even walk, basically.
That's huge there.
So it's great to see that because I think hockey's so demonstrably dominant as a sport. It's just so amazing. And it gets more and more amazing. The players are getting better and better. It's getting faster and faster and crazier and crazier. The goalies are getting better and more acrobatic and all of that. And but no one in the family cares. We have some really deep sports fandom in this family. I would say baseball is probably the universal in our family, and then football to a lesser degree. But yeah, hockey has no place. And like even I tried so hard to get into people's lives.
And on Long Island, not to the degree of Canada or certainly some other places, but I feel like there's a very strong hockey fandom on Long Island. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was huge. I feel like every kid, all my contemporaries, gave a shit, whether they were Rangers fans or Islanders fans. There might have been the odd Devils fan mixed in there too. But yeah, it's the Ramon Narvaez's of the world. Yeah. How long does the hockey season last? It goes from when to when?
It's long. It's the longest season. It's from September, and then the Stanley Cup Finals will be in June.
Okay.
So if you go deep, and what I love about the NHL playoffs is
it's a big season. Yeah.
Because Mike is a huge hockey fan too. She's a huge Bruins mark. Like she loves the Bruins and loves hockey, and it's like so fun for us to watch the games together and understand them and all of that. But it's interesting because from my perspective, the Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy to win. And it's also the only trophy in the major four sports where it's one trophy that gets circulated. Like you lose, if you can't defend it, you lose it.
Right.
And almost no one defends. The Islanders were so notable in the 80s because they defended it and won 4 times in a row, which is unprecedented. The Stanley Cup basically lived on Long Island for 5 years, which is amazing. But I love that. I love that tradition. I love how hard it is to grind out wins. You have to win 4 7-game series. Right, to win the Stanley Cup. It's incredible. Insane. So you can play as many as 28 games. You have to win 16 and you can do it that quickly, but and anything can happen, man. I mean, I remember, I think it was about 10 years ago when the LA Kings won the Stanley Cup, and I was in San Francisco. But what was cool about that was they were the 8th seed, so you 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, and so on and so forth. Sure. Each conference, as you're familiar with this. I don't have to explain this to you, but they lost. They were playing the Sharks, who are San Francisco's, the Bay Area's team, and they lost the first 3 games. So it looks like they were going to get swept. And then they came back in that series and won 4-3 and then won the Stanley Cup. They never lost another game.
That's incredible.
So they lost the first 3 games and then they went 16-0 and won the Stanley Cup as the 8th seed. That's the craziness of hockey.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Because there are no flukes. And what I love about football is that you can run the table. Like when the Jets got into the playoffs in 2009, 9-7, they get into the playoffs of the last game of the year, and then they somehow get to the conference championship. Like that's just, you can do it. You had no business being there, but you can do it because you can just any given Sunday. But when you have to do it 7 times against one team, who, by the way, you've played in the regular season probably another 8 times.
So you're familiar, right?
Very baseball-like.
Sure, yeah, right.
Yeah, but we should do a sports deep dive on the show one day about our fandom and the history with the different sports teams. And I have, I'll tease you right now, Dig, and tell you this because I know you're not going to cheat, is in the Constellation episode, which I think will come out right after this, is that the thing I want to do this week is I want to bring up sports teams logos and see who but I'm not going to do baseball and I'm probably not going to do basketball.
Okay.
Right? I want to do and I want to just see who can identify these random team crests, and all of that. I think it'll be fun.
That's going to be huge. I was wondering.
So don't cheat. No cheating.
No cheating. I'll keep it honest.
But Dave, let's get into the topic at hand today.
All right.
It's the 2005 Judd Apatow film, 40-Year-Old Virgin, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, starring, of course, Steve Carell, Catherine Keener, and then, of course, a host of funny people, Malco and Rudd, et cetera, and so on. Of course, Rogan. So I'm curious about what your history is with this film. This film, to me, reminds me a lot of college because I remember seeing it on DVD during the Netflix DVD era, but I saw it like a little later. It was one of those films. It was very similar to Wedding Crashers around that same time, which I know you love.
Yes.
And a few other films where I'm like, what the fuck is this? This sounds so stupid. I think Hot Tub Time Machine's a little later, and Pineapple Express, but very much in the same vein as that. And so me and my ex used to just rent DVDs on Netflix constantly. I think we had the 4 DVDs at a time plan, and we were clinical. I'll tell you that much, man. When we had DVDs in the mail, we had it all figured out. Like, got to get this thing into there. They'll get it. They'll send it. We were obsessed with, like, we would be so mad if we like forgot to drop something in the mailbox or something came a little late and threw off the rhythm. Yeah, it was like totally an obsession. Getting on the wait list really early when something new was announced, all that kind of stuff.
That was a thing, sure.
So we ended up renting it, and I remember being like, "This is fucking hysterical! Like, this movie is absolutely amazing." I don't know. I thought it was just going to be lowbrow, and then I guess what I realized was that I love lowbrow humor, and it is lowbrow humor. It's basically the epitome of it. I will say, rewatching it, I've seen it a couple times in the past, but I probably haven't seen it in more than 10 years. I would say at least, until I watched it last night with Micah. And I will say it's not as funny as I remember it being. Like, it's not as raucous as I remember it, but it's definitely stronger in the beginning, I think, like the first half than the second half. I think the first half is like, if it stayed that way the entire time, it would have been absolutely bonkers. And I know that it was heavily re-edited and all that. I know people were like, this sucks, and they didn't understand what was happening. But I love just throwaway, flaming type or insult humor and all of that. I just think it's fun and funny. And it's also kind of heartwarming, like what they're trying to do with this guy, although it gets a little weird sometimes. But just the background radiation of the funniness of the constant quips and the characters, Jane Lynch and all these random.
So good.
Like you can't help but laugh. Like there were times where I was just hysterical laughing because it's the delivery so good. The Indian guy,
oh my God,
talking about how he has a sheath knife in his boot. He can't put it away until it's spilled blood. Like, it's amazing. You really wonder what was written and what was just ad-libbed and all the rest. It's so good. And did you watch the extended version, or did you watch the original?
Yeah,
version?
I actually took the opportunity to watch the director's cut, which I was wondering if I had seen, but now having watched it, I definitely there was definitely clips that I didn't see before. So I watched the longer version, and I think it was the first time.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I feel like I've seen some of the clips on YouTube before, especially and some of the clips I've seen on YouTube are even not in the extended version. Like the Indian guy, and probably my favorite part of the movie, when he's going on about the pussy juice cocktail and all that kind of stuff. That goes on. I don't know if you've seen like the clip of that where he goes on. That's all ad-libbed, and he goes on and on.
No,
and
I
on,
never
and
saw
it's so
that
funny.
Extended. No.
Yeah, he says things like double-decker pussy and like all sorts of weird. It's not about the double-decker pussy. And all there. Someone wrote one in here about. Yeah, it's he said he calls it the alligator fuck house is another one he uses. It's not about the alligator fuck
Jerry
house.
Bednob, man. That guy is bonkers hilarious in this movie.
But yeah, so I'm curious about what your history is with this film. This comes from this is like a prime George Bush, W. Bush era.
It's a funny way to look
Iraq
at it.
War era comedy release, very connected to my college experience, like I said. And heavily quotable movie. I mean, I honestly use say it's not about the pussy juice cocktail still to this day. Because that's like one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard in my life. Like, it's just horrifying.
The shocking level of raunch just in the dialogue.
I love that.
It's so funny.
I love that.
It's,
and I love like it gets a little weird, and it gets a little, it gets a little racist. It gets a little sexist. It's funny. It's edgy and pushes the script. It reminds me a lot of like roast humor.
Definitely.
And I think that shit is just the best. It's just the best.
Absolutely.
So yeah, talk to me about 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Yeah, really. The humor, it feels like it was the last vestiges of that, less politically correct / not at all politically correct humor before that kind of washed out. Maybe now it's returning. People are calming down a little bit, but that was one of the things about this, Kyle. We knew it was time to do another movie on the show. We had a short list. We knew kind of inherently, instinctively, that it was time to do another comedy. So, and the other movies that we had mentioned, we'll definitely cover in time. But this one had to be the next comedy we talked about, just because it's such a classic, and both of us beloved by the two of us. But one thing I didn't realize was how old it was. 2005. I was thinking somewhere along the 2010s to the early teens.
Interesting.
I didn't know we were going back this far.
Yeah,
almost 20 years.
It's funny because I thought I was the opposite, where I was like, I thought this was slightly older.
Okay.
There's the thing when I realized when he says Boner Jams 03, like when they have the video Boner Jams 03, I'm like, wait, 03. And then I went and looked. I'm like, it was filmed in 2005. So
yeah.
So I was like, I thought it was filmed maybe in 2004. So a little older than I thought it was. So it's interesting that you came away the exact opposite. I can see how you feel that way though, because like you could see 20 of these posters like knocked up, which I think was supposed to maybe even be like a sequel to this movie. In conception.
Yeah.
And all of these different things, like they all have the same. And it's like I said, Pineapple Express and it's all the same. It's all the same movie. And it goes right into Bad or Dirty Grandpa or Bad Grandpa, whatever the De Niro one is that I love. And all the other ones, they're all the same.
That's really
so I can see how
point.
you get them confused.
Yeah, there's a window of time where all those comedies, the Judd Apatow stuff, the Seth Rogen stuff, those other offshoots, the Fockers comedy, like they all exist, right?
And that's and Meet the Parents is like from 2000, I think. But then Meet the Fockers is like later, and then there's a third one, I think.
Yeah,
which I don't think I've ever even seen.
I just heard about that recently. I never saw that one either.
Shout out to De Niro. I know people think this is controversial. I think De Niro is just as notable of a comedy player as he is a dramatic player.
He's so good at it.
He's so funny, dude.
He's so good at it. And you just feel like if there's any actor you kind of trust, you'll take a ride with. I mean, De Niro kind of earned that, right? As a dramatic actor, just his instincts aren't going to lie. He's kind of a genius.
I've got nipples, Greg. Can you milk me?
Have we not done that movie?
Yeah, we got to get.
That's another one.
That's an iconic point. Hey, takes place on Long Island.
Yes. Yeah. It's My Way or the Long Island Expressway. I believe.
I think it's in Oyster Bay.
Oyster Bay. Yeah. But you know what? It was nice to go back. I think I really enjoyed it. I laughed out loud a bunch of times. I was actually concerned I was going to wake up the family. But like you, I think all in all, I remembered it being even funnier. It's definitely worth a rewatch. And listen, right now, if you guys watch this soon to our airing date, I think it's 99 cents on sale on Amazon Prime right now, down from $4 for the HD. So just watch it, watch it once or twice and enjoy it. But I mean, this 2005, man, I was really waxing nostalgic because this is 28-year-old Dagan. I was a young man. I was just married. We were married less than a year when this film came out. No, I'm sorry. We were married. We had just owned our first house. We owned our first house less than a year. Only married for a couple of years. No kidlets yet. And I didn't see this movie in the movie theater, but like so many comedies of this era, as soon as it was released on demand, right, you jump on it. And like you said, though, it's one of those films, even though you might know Judd Apatow, or you might know Jonah Hill, or you might know the Seth Rogen joints and all these, you just kind of rolling the dice because you're like, I don't know what this is going to be. It's kind of an extension in a way of the Adam Sandler comedies, almost the same thing. So funny
you say that. I was exactly what I was thinking.
It's like the next chapter of that, where it's like, I guess I'll take a shot, and usually it pays off. And this movie,
because I'm sorry to interrupt, but you could kind of see the blurring of like Grandma's Boy is the kind of movie that crossed over, I think, from the Sandler people to this more kind of comedy, 21st century comedy.
Yeah, it's odd. They don't really they dovetail, but they don't overlap. There's like a passing of the baton in a strange way. Also, something really remarkable, and we'll talk about this with the Jim Carrey movies too. Another one of those things where these comedic actors or stand-ups or improv geniuses go on to do, be like really notable dramatic actors, right? Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler, Robin Williams was kind of, you could argue, the first.
Yeah, he was awesome as a dramatic.
Right? Yeah.
Steve Carell is great.
And Bill Hader is doing it now.
And Hader, right, exactly. That's really, it's so interesting because it's almost like Jim Carrey to me became unlikable as like a figure to me. He kind of became unfunny. Like it's hard for me to imagine Jim Carrey being funny anymore.
Yeah.
Like and he might do some comedic parts, and I know he does Sonic and all of that, but it's hard for me to be like, Jim Carrey is really like a funny guy now. But the others can kind of flex between the two, which I respect.
That's a good point.
I'll take them seriously no matter which role, I'll take them seriously.
You could take them either way that they choose to do. They could reinvent themselves. Jim Carrey is interesting. I feel like Jim Carrey, if you watch his more contemporary interviews too, he has taken a more serious turn in just his approach and his philosophy and all that. I think just in life, not just in his Hollywood personas or the roles that he chooses. So he is an interesting cat. But I love that kind of thing because Steve Carell would go on to do that too, brilliantly, may I add. Bob Odenkirk's another one. Yeah. Bryan Cranston, these guys that could do it all. De Niro, perfect example of that. But I think this is just one of those things. It's like a popcorn comedy. You sit down, you know you're going to laugh. And it has its key players. You know, you have your Paul Rudds, you have your Seth Rogans, even your Jane Lynches and all that kind of stuff. But also you have this huge comedic ensemble cast, which is typical of a Judd Apatow movie, where some of the most memorable scenes involves these bit players and kind of these one-off models. There's another thing I realized about this movie in particular, but I think it speaks to the Judd Apatow / Seth Rogen comedies. And the reason I put that slash in there is because you have these two guys who are writer, director, producers, and they wear 1, 2, or 3 hats depending on the project, right? But they have this model for the movies that I think really works. First of all, you have the raunch that we talked about, right? The shockingly raunchy dialogue. I think of another movie we did, like Superbad, where it's hilarious because it's realistic. That's the way people talk in the back room of box stores and their various jobs. I know growing up working in the supermarket, working with slightly older dudes and some much older dudes, where that was the conversation in the back room. Those doors shut. God knows what those guys were saying, what inappropriate things they were saying.
Yeah, that's just people are so weird that they don't understand that that's true.
Oh my God, it's hilarious.
Like when I worked landscaping, it was the same thing. We had like decades worth of Playboys just in the fucking office. Nonetheless, like all of so it was a different time a little bit too, but I just think it's like Trump, I think, kind of put the nomenclature on it, like locker room talk. And I'm like, and to me, I'm like, yeah,
that's it.
I don't usually participate in that, but I've certainly been around it. I'm not going to sit around and judge anyone and be like, oh, Madonna, me, look at that girl, or whatever. You see, it's like,
bite your fist.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly.
It's break room talk. I mean, there were break rooms that I worked, like, let's say I worked somebody that was really kind of unisex in a way. Like there were equal parts male, female. So the break rooms there, like Urban Outfitters, right? Couldn't say too much because it was so mixed up. You didn't want to offend somebody, right? But I love that the model of that, the cutaways, the flashbacks, they have the riffing scenes, the improv scenes where you could tell the actors just ad-libbing on something. It lingers a little too long because they're having a little too much fun riffing on something. And then the comedy, but the characters. These Judd Apatow movies are all about the characters. It reminds me of my favorite, which is Superbad, where these characters just feel genuine. You know these people. These people are direct mirrors of people that you know in your own life. And that's what makes it hilarious because it's authentic to your own experience, I think. And I'll talk about that more as we talk about it, but that's what I really love. It's not even the raunchiness of the comedy, and there's certainly not a terrible amount of physical comedy or pratfalls or anything like that. But it's just the genuine nature of the characters and that they feel like people in our real lives. And that's why I think that's why you come back to a 40-year-old virgin, because it's like, yeah, this happened to me when I was a kid. This happened when I was in college, when I was working my way through school, when I was a teenager, in the locker room, like you said, in the break room, in the back room. It's just, it feels like it's timeless, and it should apply to everybody. I know it's almost 20 years old now, but I'm sure this is still the way it is.
I imagine so. And I'll also say that I've known plenty of women who are just as raunchy, if not raunchier than dudes, especially as I've gotten older, like all the different people I've encountered in life. I'm not saying people I've dated necessarily, just women, and my best friend in college was, other than Ramon, we had a shared friend. So Ramon and I were buddies with, well, let me back up. I was friends with this girl, Abby, for my entire 4 years. It was we had political classes together and we became really close friends. And she was like really one of my very closest friends. We used to post up at her house, and Ramon was part of that group. We would just basically, her dad owned an apartment in Boston. So she lived off campus in the same apartment for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And it was awesome. So we would just go over there and get smoked out and drink and hang out. And it was just a lot of great memories. And she was like one of the boys, you know, and I loved that. That's why I get a little upset when people are like, it's impossible to be friends with women or whatever. I'm like, I think it's complicated. I think that there can be sexual tension and all those things. I think that that's true, but I think it's possible. I did it.
Oh, it's possible.
So It's like, it is possible.
Definitely.
Like experientially, it can be done. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, what makes the movie fun. Like you said, it's like these different characters. One of the things I love about this movie is how quick it is. Not in its runtime. It's actually pretty long for a comedy at 2 hours, 15 minutes if you watch the director's cut, but I just like how there are lulls and then something pounces on you that's funny and you don't really realize it. And it's actually a Jane Lynch quote that I thought was really, really funny, where they asked, I think it's Jay asked, like, would you fuck him? Talking about Andy, and she's like, oh, in a New York minute. Like, just like really quick. And it comes out after this like really soft period where there's like not a lot of humor. It just surprises you, and it's so good and it's so fun. Talk to me about what you like about the characters in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, the Jane Lynch just steals the show. It's so nice to see her in a Judd Apatow ensemble, because she is typically in most of, if not all of, Christopher Guest's films. Mm-hmm. And she just works in that capacity. Like, she's so brilliant, and you believe her character no matter what she's playing so much that you just can't wait for her to come on screen. What's funny about her in this role is she's not making jokes. I mean, she's just being an out and out predator, and she's doubling down on that. She's so serious about it, whether, you know, she's talking to Cal about, you know, I would fuck the shit out of him, or she's singing some Spanish, you know, overture to Andy or something like that. It's so weird. It's strange. She's a strange character. She's an interesting one because she reminded me, I dealt with a couple of sexual harassment people when I was working my way through college. Like, I was sexually harassed on the job. It wasn't anything really? Physical or threatening. Yeah, I never really talked about this before. There were two different people at a specific place that I worked, and this went on at the same time, actually. And it was a clothing retailer in Philly, and they were both managers of this place. And one was a straight woman and one was a gay guy. And it was all verbal. I never felt threatened. It never got physical. And I was always just able to laugh it off. And it never really bothered me. But they were definitely both sexually harassing me in verbal ways. You know, again, it never got to touching. It never got physical in any way. And I was never really off put by it. I actually kind of thought, honestly, I don't know if it was just a different era. We're talking about 20 something years ago, right? 25 years ago. But that character, Jane Lynch's character, Paula, reminded me of that in a way, because they were kind of unapologetic about it. And it's just kind of it's a similar thing. And I've seen this movie several times, and I never really made that connection until this time. But I love that character. This movie, you could be in on the Andy character or Trish or the trio of David, Jay, and Cal. But even if you don't like those characters, there's so many other characters to enjoy. Like you were saying, the Mooj character, Paula, Nikki, Beth. I love the collection of characters. I like there being a lot of players. Again, it reminds me of Superbad and Pineapple Express and This Is 40 and some of the other Judd Apatow joints where it's like, it's just chocked full of comedic players. No matter how small the part, everyone's really brilliant. And I think that just keeps it alive. You know, it just keeps it interesting. Everybody's comedic style is kind of intertwined. And there's always a moment built around even the smallest character, and always something to look forward to. So I kind of love that. And I love the combo. I just love the mashup of Steve Carell's style with a Catherine Keener, who's, you know, kind of historically a more serious actress. But her comedic chops kind of tied in works. And of course, seeing Paul Rudd pre-MCU, and of course, Seth Rogen's antics, and Romany Malco, which I don't know from that many things. Talk about a character who, in Jay, who feels like at least 3 or 4 people that I knew in real life. Kind of that charismatic ladies' man, smart, but kind of a cut up, plotting, scheming, kind of a good guy, but he's cheating on his woman and he's always got a trick up his sleeve and stuff. And just a smooth operator and very articulate. The Jay character is funny because you're like, this character is actually quite smart, but he's squandering his talents working at this electronics store and just scheming on girls. Like, this guy could be, a Hollywood agent. He's kind of a wheeler and dealer. He's sweet talker. He's got that honey, dripping from his mouth or whatever. But I love, again, every character though feels like someone I knew in college or high school, or that I know now, or maybe I knew people throughout my life of that. That's what's so funny about it. It's like, oh, this cat's just like this guy, or that girl's just like this girl, the promiscuous girl who's just like wildly sexual, like the Beth character. It's like, yeah, we know people like that. The minx, right? The unapologetic minx. Totally. There's not a character
and the Nikki character too.
They all make me laugh, and it's cool to go back 20 years and see like Elizabeth Banks is a proper movie star now. This is even pre Zach and Miri Make a Porno, like Kevin Smith's turn at doing the Judd Apatow joint. But all these characters, whether they're MCU or they just made, they had big Hollywood breakouts, whatever. These are a lot of these people. Seth Rogen's an important dude in Hollywood now. This is when they were kind of still a little bit hungry, and I like that era. It's 20 years ago.
Totally. And it's interesting too. Like I've forgotten rewatching it with a new lens. It's like Kat Dennings is in this, which I totally had forgotten. She's pretty famous now. And Mindy Kaling, I totally forgot, plays Rudd's like ex-girlfriend, which I had totally, exactly. And that's like early when this is being filmed. It's like that they're already on The Office. So this is pretty interesting. Like this is kind of a burgeoning
forgot about
thing
The Office,
here,
right?
Going on there. So I like that. So it's funny though, you brought up the sexual harassment thing, just in that I do think Jane Lynch is a more comedic, like, I don't know, like a cougar or whatever. So I don't get like vibes from that necessarily. Cause like she goes to him later. She's like, well, if you change your mind or whatever, like all that weird stuff. But I do think that there is a weird moment in this movie, which is the like insinuation that you go after like drunk women.
Oh man.
And there's really they only pull back from it slightly because he like I do think it's funny. He goes up and talks to a woman who just passed out and asks her if he can get her another cocktail. And they're like too drunk, which is funny. But I do feel like that's a little weird, but maybe also unfortunately realistic. I mean, there's no doubt. I'm like such a concerned person. When I was in college, I no doubt could have hooked up with many more women than I did. And I don't say that to brag. I say that because I was like really extra cautious. I didn't want to be around. I didn't want to take women home from parties and be with drunk girls and all that. I just felt like it was so strange and dangerous in some sense. And I know people that have been in situations where it's like you were taken advantage of or drugged or, you didn't really know what you were doing. And we just talked about that when we were talking about Vegas recently too, about a drunk girl I play, that was at a table I was playing where they just let her fucking spend all of her money. And so people are obviously taking advantage of people that are drunk all the time. I just obviously don't think that that's okay. And I don't think it doesn't not belong in a movie either. I'm not trying to be like a prude or anything like that, but I do think it gets a little weird.
Yeah. Does it cross the line?
That? Yeah. What do you think about that?
We're talking about comedies. We certainly have this conversation about comedies that are even older, but a comedy that's 20 years old, it's like, what could they get away with and what's aged well? And you can make an argument like the whole running gag in this movie about, I know you're gay cause, and that's a whole thing that they cut back to. And you could tell they're improvising and ad-libbing the actors and stuff. Has that aged well? But something about, taking advantage of drunk people / date rape, that's roofies, that sort of thing. It's like is that encroaching on a boundary? Is that going too far? And how far can you push comedy? I have to say, my first instinct with that is that everything could be funny if it's handled deftly and tastefully, and it's presented with a certain tone, right? Then anything could be comedic. You just have to be able to pull it off. I do think you're going to always offend somebody. You can never just do something that's maybe a little racy and think, I'm not going to offend anybody. I think that's probably impossible. But I do think they get away with it because the characters are so clueless. Not just the Andy character, but that Jay, Cal, and David, this trifecta of bad influences, are they're just a bad look. They shouldn't be taken seriously. We know as outsiders looking in that these guys think they know a lot more than they know. They're ill-informed, they're immature, they're just a bad influence. And we know that. So it comes across as funny because we know they're imparting the wrong advice to somebody who's in need of advice. He's got to kind of grow into this 40-year-old now, and they're not the answer. And we know that. So it's funny. But you think of a movie like, I don't know if you've seen, Kyle, it's probably 2 or 3 years old now, Promising Young Woman, which is a dark, I wouldn't even say it's a dark comedy. It's a dramatic sort of story about this very thing. And the way it's presented in that movie is done with it's a much more sinister, much darker tone.
What is it called?
Promising Young Woman. It's awesome.
Okay.
It's an awesome film.
I never heard of it.
And that's the whole thing. It's taking that same topic, spinning it on its head. Now you're presenting it in a much more disturbing way to be taken seriously. But the Judd Apatow comedies, they've done everything. I mean, look at Pineapple Express. They do blackface. They don't pull punches comedically. And you gotta sort of, even if you don't like it or you think it was handled improperly, you gotta sort of tip your cap that nothing's off the table. And also, I think knowing these people and being plugged into who these people are, there's nothing sort of underhanded or mean-spirited about it. It's to be taken as comedy. It's to be taken lightly. These are not racist people. These are not sexist people, hateful people. It's just comedy. And I think, something I learned about Judd Apatow, which I'm not sure I realized, is he's kind of Gary Shandling's protege. And it's interesting how that generational divide, though, like Gary Shandling's comedy was of a certain style. And I think just because it's a younger generation, Judd Apatow came from that stock, but then puts his own generational spin on it. It's not silly like Adam Sandler. It's not really dark or, sort of maybe mean-spirited like another comedy would, comedian would handle it. But it feels very Judd Apatow. If you look at his body of work, you could see everything fitting together. It's kind of a complete package. And that they're just out to lampoon shit. They're just out to really make you laugh, maybe shock you a little bit. And who knows, maybe that's part of the brilliance, is that you talk about it and maybe you offend some people, almost like embracing that no publicity is bad publicity thing in a way.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I was reading a little bit about the Gary Shandling connection too, which I didn't know. You can kind of see it, I guess. Gary Shandling's mega funny, very understated.
Self-deprecating.
Yeah, it's good stuff. But yeah, it does get a little weird, but I think you're right. I don't know that it's intended. Maybe it's like just differences in how people feel then versus now about certain things or whatever. And I guess it is an acknowledgement of the reality that people get drunk at bars and go home with each other, and people go to parties and
we've seen
get fucked up and have one night stands. It does happen. And I'm sure. So is it a reflection of reality, perhaps an uncomfortable one? And maybe it's uncomfortable because you don't want to not like these characters, but you kind of have to in some sense, not like some of them anyway. Especially like the character Jay, like probably the most unlikable of the characters from a morality point of view,
right,
but
exactly.
Also very funny. So like he's not your friend. So like, what do you care
right
about? about all that. So
and they're stupid. We know they're dumb. We know they're complete fuck ups. And again, that's sort of echoing the people that we know in our real lives. We both know it wasn't only taking advantage of girls or seeing that happen or knowing or hearing of that happening or that being a common thing, which is unfortunate. But I know men and women who were the people that would pass out at parties and be the potential victims. So again, it's like, it's knowing that it's dealing with, it's directly referencing our own experiences with that kind of stuff. Like this shit, unfortunately, this shit happened, or there was a risk of it happening, and it was kind of a prominent thing. Not that it was right in any way, of course, but it was just one of those unfortunate things of people that couldn't control themselves or get blackout drunk. And, it's not, it's a bad look.
Yeah, it's interesting because that part of the movie, which is like kind of like the center of the movie, maybe, where they're at the bar, they meet the bachelorette party. God, annoying drunk women. It's like the worst. Ugh. Always been a turnoff. Can't stand it. Hate it. But it's funny because there's an even worse thing in the movie that's represented that we think is funny, but is probably the most serious of all, which is like just the total drunk driving scene, which, again, I have no problem being in a movie. Unfortunately, that does reflect reality. Now, I don't drive, so I've never driven drunk. I've never done that before, but I can say I've been with people that have driven drunk. And sometimes I would say almost all of those times, not that there's that many of them and I haven't done it in many years, but it's like, you don't know until later or whatever, or during or something. And that sucks. And people shouldn't do that. But can you lampoon it in a, can you lampoon, and people drive drunk every day, unfortunately. I mean, people you wonder, well, you think about just, we're so used to living in more like suburban and urban areas. I lived in cities for years where you just walk and take trains and take cabs and Ubers. But like, what do you think you're doing if you're going to the Applebee's in your little town in North Dakota, and then you're driving home?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, so like, unfortunately, these things happen. And so acknowledging it and lampooning it, there's no problem with that. But I'm surprised that wouldn't be the more controversial thing, which to me, just, I guess what I'm saying is it shows just a very selectiveness about what we should be offended by or what we feel like we should be offended by. And him blowing into the breathalyzer and this girl going on this crazy joyride and crashing her car or whatever is probably the most dangerous and fucked up part of the movie when you really think about it. But we don't look at it the same way as like the taking advantage of the drunk girls or whatever.
It's a great point. Yeah, because it's like there's faceless potential victims out there, but now rather than dealing with 20 girls in a bar, you're dealing with these faceless victims that are in cars or houses or crossing the street or whatever. And I think it's also, we've talked about this on the show before. I think when it's hyperbole, it's exaggeration. When you're creating something like this, you want to go big with it. The Leslie Mann character getting into the car and just hitting 20 parked cars and knocking their mirrors off, and just going big with how ridiculous, how absurd it is, and just saying, kind of doubling down on, look, we're being funny about it. It's comedy. And also no one's getting hurt. Again, tone, right? It's like some old guy crossing the street with his walker, and she, plows him over and knocks his leg off or something. That would be a much more, now it's the opening of Private Ryan.
Right. Yeah. D-Day +1.
Where this guy's going to pick up his leg in the intersection. Like, it's presented as comedy. And I feel like, at least from my sensibilities, you get it because of the way it's presented, the way that it's painted. It's a certain type of, it's a certain type of presentation. And, I think Judd Apatow is very good at that, going big, and this is exaggeration. This is hyperbole. This is comedy. These people are obviously ridiculous. Look how crazy this woman is. It would be, think about that whole tone. Like if Leslie Mann, which I can't see her doing this, but gets in a car and with Steve Carell, and it's awkward and they don't really know each other and it's small talk, and she's really trying to double down on that she's okay enough to drive, and it's kind of serious. Maybe they're playing different music. It's a whole different movie, right? But the fact that she's saying she's going to throw up her shellfish, and she's singing, and she's not even looking at the road, and she's asking him to say she's pretty, it's comedy. It's clear cut comedy. There could be no bones made about it.
I agree with you.
It's a cartoon.
I think that's very well put. Yeah, he's exactly right. Very well put. I wanted to ask you about, I guess the center of the movie is obviously about sex and about the importance that society places on it. And this is just a topic that comes up over and over again on my shows because I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's so included in everything that we cover one way or the other. But what do you think about the importance of sex in culture? Do you think it's too much? Like, do you think Andy's weird? Right. And I would imagine that he would be considered weird in or out of this movie. It's just unusual to be 40 years old and not have sex yet, especially when you're just a kind of a normal person that's not put yourself out there. And then you kind of get the flashbacks about maybe some of the things that went wrong for him. He almost scored with a few pretty hot chicks over time and just didn't really know what he was doing and all of that, which is funny. But it does kind of underline this fascination I have with the fascination of sex in society, as far as the importance placed on it and how it just rules so much. And it's so strange to me. As I get older and older, I don't know, I kind of lament it in some way. It just seems so shallow and stupid. And you can see that play out in this movie about how just meaningless it all is and how he's totally normal, nice, decent person. And I don't know, kind of feel bad for him in some way. What do you think about all of that?
I wanted to ask you this. Because I was kind of a late bloomer myself. You don't have to, of course, we don't have to name names here for the people, but what of the people you know of or met, what is the latest that person has lost their virginity? Who's the person that you know that waited the longest? How old were they?
It's a good question. I think I knew people in my early 20s, probably the mid 20s, that maybe have never had sex.
It's pretty late.
It's which I think is late, but
it's not.
No, I had sex for the first time when I was 16, and I don't recommend that either. But I do think that, like,
though.
yeah, it is
very common.
But I think like between 18 and 20, you can probably start dealing with that in a mature and rational and decent way. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. But I wouldn't recommend going, because I will say that, like, I didn't emotionally handle it very well. I thought it was very heavy and weird. Like, it felt. I remember, like, I don't really remember having sex the first time, but I remember how I felt, which was like, it's hard to describe it. It's almost scary. You feel like you like walk, at least for me, I don't know. Maybe people were afterwards like, that was the best thing ever and all that. But for me, I just thought it was like, it opened up this whole Pandora's box in my life of like new sets of realities and possibilities and pratfalls and
sure
pregnancy and STDs and all the things that you can expose yourself to. And I don't know. I felt like it was very heavy. So I almost, when I feel like people are having sex for the first time and say like they're late teens or early 20s, I'm like, that seems better for me. You don't want to wait till you're 40, probably.
Right.
But I do think it's important to say that, like, it shouldn't be the center of all things. And I do get frustrated. I mean, I guess it's just natural, but I get frustrated that it becomes the center of all things. It seems like it's at the nexus of everything.
Yeah.
And this movie kind of touches on that. I mean, I don't think it means to, but
definitely. It's an obsession. Yeah. I mean, yeah, sex and our sexualized culture, society, whatever. It's an interesting thing. I was a late bloomer. I definitely was the last of my good friends to lose their virginity. I was 19. And part of hanging on to my virginity was part of my Peter Pan syndrome, which I talk about a lot, which was like, this is another way for me to feel young, because it is one of the biggest demonstrative growing up milestones, right? It really is one of those heavy things where once you have sex, once you lose your virginity, that's a turning of the page. That's kind of a crossing over. You can never go back to not being to being a virgin. And it's something that is one of those big growing up moments, maybe one of the biggest. It's interesting. I mean, by the time I was 19, I guess I didn't have that sort of remorse or regret or anything like that, because I already felt like maybe I was a little late. So that worked. Maybe waiting worked out in my favor in regards to that. Plus, I was with a girl. Then we were in the beginnings of our relationship, but who I was with for a few years. So it wasn't a one night stand scenario, or there was no domino effect with sleeping with a lot of other girls at that time or anything. But I was certainly a late bloomer, and I was definitely like you, kind of reflecting on what it felt like in those early days. And, it's that type of thing where the idea of sex is so glorified, but early on when we're losing our virginity and just learning about relationships or being with other people and the physical act of sex and all that kind of stuff is anything but glamorous, right? Because we're just learning, we're just learning all of those things, the romantic bits, the tender bits, the physical bits, whatever, right? So that's an interesting thing to think about. And it is another thing that's very telling in our society that maybe we know someone in their early to mid 20s, that one anomaly that waited that long. But again, we're a very sexualized culture. Nobody waits that long. Most people lose their virginity somewhere in their mid to late teens. And I think late teens is even pushing it. And I'm not even saying that by 80s and 90s standards for us, but, certainly today, I'm sure it's the same thing. It's just, and I really used to have a very cynical philosophy about this. Not that I was, not to be a hypocrite, because, you're just as sexualized or sexual, you have the same sexual proclivities as most people, but I did have this, I embraced this sort of philosophy that, yes, sex is what makes the world go round, right? That everything is sexualized. Sex sells. There's nothing that sells like sex, whether it's TV or music or on billboards, advertising, internet porn, right? Like that's what makes the world go round. That's what everybody wants. It seems like you could really be ultra cynical about it and say, that's why you do well in school, to go to a good college, to get a good job, to get nice things, to have money so you could, get together with a member, whatever you're attracted to, member of the opposite sex, member of the same sex, whatever. So you could score, especially when you're young. You're not looking to settle down and start, having a family necessarily when you're in your late teens, early 20s. So, and you could even argue at any age, sex is kind of seems like it's at the nucleus, like it's at the center of everything. And I think it's sometimes it's kind of hard to argue that. I mean, look around, right? And again, like, I'm not immune to that. I'm just like everybody else. Like, what are we moved by? But I think when you get older, you could start to be introspective about it. I think that's just the natural course of things. I think it's harder to see when you're younger, less experienced, maybe less mature. As you get older, you do see, like, okay, I could see the forest for the trees. There are other things, but that, again, that's a wisdom or an experience that's accrued. And I'm not sure that applies to everybody. I'm sure some people are just as serious about their life goals, and that's at the center of it. And, you look at, and again, I'm not pointing fingers. Look at the old guy, balding. He's in his Porsche convertible, right? He's cruising the strip. Maybe he's divorced once, twice, 3 times, looking for a hot young girl. Same thing. Go to a bar, got some cougar ladies. I don't know. Is cougar like is that a bad word? I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's like MILF. I think
okay.
it just is what.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like maybe it would even be self-referential. If you were a cougar, you would
I think
call yourself one.
I think so. Yeah.
But yeah, man, I think I'm certainly of that mind, and I definitely thought of that. I've been of that same mind probably for decades, where it's like, yeah, it does seem like sex is at the center of things, and that's what's making the world spin, man. Like that's the pull, that's the magnetic draw. And I think in an odd way, even if you want to transcend the comedy, this movie is kind of saying that too. And maybe this movie is even using that as a selling point too. I don't know if it's hypocritical or clever that it does that, but it's certainly, sex is one of those enticing things. I mean, what is it? Sex, money, power. It's the, that's the unholy trinity, right? That's the trifecta. That's what people want in life. And when you get older, you could examine it and see, maybe you could adopt a different philosophy, but it does seem to be the way of the world. And not just now. I think it's been this way for many hundreds of years. It just, as things grow, it seems like as time evolves, right? As we turn the page on history, it seems like maybe it gets a little more sexualized, but I think it was always the same. I just think it was in different forms, right?
And it was repressed a lot too. But
sure, yeah.
But I think I always say that's what's so hot about the Victorian era to me, though. Like in a literal way, is like it's just so repressed. Like there's something sexy about that. About like, you know, women busting out of their, you know, their corsets and, you know, like hanging out in these, that would be even pre-Victorian time, of course, but it's like, it is sexualized, but you're not allowed to do anything about it.
Right.
Like it's sexualized, but you can't say it.
No,
Sexualized, but you can't look.
It.
Right. Like there's something about that.
You're right. It was covert.
Right.
That's how it's changed. You make a great point. It was covert.
Love letters and like, you know, star-crossed lovers and all sorts of, it's good. It's more interesting that way.
And more romantic, I would argue.
Right. I don't think sex has to be romantic, but yeah, that's true. I think I will say, and I think stats show this, that I think Generation X, so your generation, is the most sexualized, or like the generation that had sex the earliest.
Okay.
And apparently it is reverting. Like the newer generations are having less sex, having sex later again, and all of the rest. But I don't know that speaks to human nature as much as that just speaks to the digital era and the digital age. I just think it's not only porn and stuff like that, but it's just the inability of people to get together. I think sometimes you have like sexual encounters or whatever, or a sexualized relationship with someone when you really have to be around them and know them. And so without all of that, it's like a phantom. So there is something about that, but I don't think it's stopping everyone. And I don't think it's a sign of human nature. Again, I think it's literally just the way things have changed. So there, like, fewer people drive today, like fewer younger people drive because they don't have to. It doesn't speak to the nature of driving or the need to go places. It's just like times have changed. They just don't need to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and when I refused to drive, it was a little different. But I also was really stubborn knowing that this future was coming. In fact, it's here a lot sooner than I thought it was going to be here. So that's nice anyway. Another thing I wanted to ask you, Dig, and this is just random because I just have random notes about this movie. And by the way, shout out to, we were talking about them sexualizing everything or whatever. I do love when he describes it's a famous scene, but describes his experience having sex as like touching a woman's breast is like a bag of sand. And I love that. I think it's Jay that asks if she had long National Geographic nipples, which I thought was a really amazing way of putting it. So shout out to that scene. But you know what else is funny about this? A kind of a timestamp on this movie from my perspective is the selling stuff on eBay store. Because I remember these, and I don't know if you do, but it was like a big movement for a little while. In fact, I think the eBay store here in the movie is like was a real eBay, like sell your stuff on eBay store, which is interesting. And I just wanted to know if you remember that. eBay is still huge. It's bigger than it's ever been. But there was this era where people tried to act as the middleman on eBay. I guess to great success in some ways, but you don't see that anymore. I just think that's probably the most interesting timestamp on this movie, more than anything, is the soundtrack and maybe the games and things they show, but certainly that as well. Do you remember that era?
Oh my God. I remember it like it was yesterday. We had near our first home, just a few towns from here, we had an eBay store. You know, we sell your products. And the guy, that storefront, he might even still be there. There was only one time I went in to try to sell something, to use like that liaison between, rather than just posting it myself. I was really into tuning cars at that point, and I had two parts. I had like a front bumper kit for my current car at the time, might have been my Scion TC, and I had coilover springs, like lowering springs, that I wasn't going to use. And I brought them in, and he agreed to sell my coilover springs, but he wouldn't sell my body kit. I don't even know why. It was like a $500 body kit or something. And I was like, oh, let's see if we can sell for a couple hundred. It's just sitting in my basement. And he refused to sell that. That was my only, and then I was a little bit perturbed by that.
I wonder why that is.
I don't know. He was just like, it's too...
Maybe he knew the market wasn't good for that or whatever.
Yeah, or it's too specific. It was for a certain car, a certain model year. He didn't want to get into that. I don't know why he couldn't put it on eBay Motors, because that's still a big channel for buying, selling, and trading.
Yeah, you'd think you just want a business. It's basically like a digital consignment shop. So you'd think you'd want to just sell what you could.
Yeah, and it's a high ticket item. We get a couple hundred. He whacks it up with me and takes a percentage. I don't know why he didn't do it, but that was the only time I ever dealt with him. I think he did sell my coilover springs. But yeah, that was a very specific time. And I do still see some of those storefronts. And again, I'm not in the Valley, in LA where they are. I'm in the Pennsylvania suburbs, and that still existed, where it was like, I guess too much. It was enough. There was enough of a business there where people would use a middleman because they just didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, right? That I can understand. It also seemed to take advantage of that interesting era where just people didn't quite understand tech fully yet. Like I personally think if you're how can you possibly live in the United States today and not understand how things work anymore? That to me is strange and weird, but much less so 15 or 20 years ago.
Sure.
So like if you're an 80-year-old now, you should definitely know how to use the internet. If you were an 80-year-old in 2005, you probably don't know how to use the internet.
Yeah, you might not. Yeah, it's true.
But that's the way I see it anyway.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I wanted to just bring that up. I thought that was an interesting thing as well. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you, and then I just want to go through scenes in the movie, like our favorite scenes and quotes or whatever, and get into that. But the last thing I wanted to ask was, actually there's two more things. Let's talk about two things kind of towards the end. Again, a sign of the times. I guess it's a sign of the times for two reasons. Smart tech, which I got to get a smart tech shirt made.
Smart tech.
That would be like I have the Initech shirt. I think smart tech would be a fun shirt to get made and see if people recognize it. But that store in and of itself is a sign of the times. Like the Circuit Cities of the world are gone now. Best Buy is in complete decline. It's so interesting hearing about. It seems like a common issue where Best Buys are just empty when people go into them. I don't know if you've heard that, which is so weird. So I guess it's just turning into like a digital warehouse kind of thing. And I guess maybe that's inevitable for them if they want to survive. But back then, it's so interesting being in that kind of store where you absolutely 100% bought things like that in person. And it's also interesting to see these like tube widescreens and these 4:3 flat screens and all that. It's like the evolutionary step in the background of this movie on all the scenes in Smart Tech are these really ancient televisions that were very high tech at that time. And I was thinking when I watched this movie, I still had a 4:3 Sony Trinitron, and I watched this movie on probably a TV from the 70s that my ex had in her dorm room. That worked fine. But it's so interesting to think that things have come so far. And I often said it was around that era when I would start going to bars and watch sports. And that was what really transformed my mind into like, holy mother of God, this looks so good. I can't believe how bad how bad TV images are. It's just horrible. And so I wanted to throw that out there. I was curious what you made of all of the tech and kind of seeing the background of a Best Buy like store during an era when those kinds of stores were thriving. In other words, having that kind of store today, I would think that if you were writing a movie like this today, it's like The Office. Part of what is in the background is that this company is failing, right? And that's kind of always been the background with Dunder Mifflin, is like the company's kind of failing.
Yeah.
So that would be like a whole different level of humor, perhaps. But then it wasn't that way at all. So I'm just curious if you picked any of that up. Big box store. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's such a dated reference now because you're right. Technology, television technology, audio, visual, entertainment tech has come so far in such a short time. So you can't watch this movie and not be drawn to the fact that everything is so dated. This was maybe the era where HD television was coming in, and a flat screen meant that your big picture tube television had HD and a flat screen. It wasn't bubbled or convexed, but this was way before the 10-pound 65-inch flat screen television. I mean, that's a much more modern thing, but this was still in that vestiges where the Seth Rogen character, the Cal character, had the weight belt and he had to carry the giant thing out to the car on a dolly or a hand truck because the thing weighed hundreds of pounds. So it wasn't quite the console TV of the 50s and 60s, which was like the huge piece of furniture.
Yeah,
but
like
it kind of was.
Never move. Yeah, like you couldn't. We had a TV like that when we were kids. I mean, but it was made in the 80s. But it was huge. It was so heavy. It was an RCA.
Yeah,
I don't know how big it was, 40 inches maybe or whatever. But it was it had this wooden base and you could spin it on its wooden kit.
Swiveled.
It swiveled. And dude, that thing it was
furniture.
Like that was a notorious piece of furniture in our family.
Yes.
That people were like, what the fuck do you do with this? And I think Dana ended up having it at some point, and then I think it was thrown away. But it is, it's just interesting reflecting on that, because not only are TVs cheaper than they've ever been, like when I go to BJ's or something, Price Club, I'm like, why are TVs so cheap? Like when did this happen? Like the highest end TV is $2,000 or something.
Yeah.
I always tell the story about I remember when Matt Casamassina got a flat screen. I was at IGN. I was still a freelancer. He got like a beautiful flat screen. It was $10,000. And it was like, to me, that was 20 years ago, of course, but it's just so interesting to think about how much times have changed, that people don't go into those stores anymore, because you couldn't possibly have imagined at the time spending the requisite amount of money without seeing the product. But now TVs are so cheap and computers are so cheap, and they're all kind of good, that you just buy them on the internet. You buy them on Amazon for $400 and they just deliver it to your house and it's £4. You know? And I don't. So I really noticed that about the store too, or about this movie too. And what I really wanted to ask you, and why I was getting into that, and I wanted to make sure to get back to this, is, so Andy is being convinced to open a stereo store by the woman he's seeing, which is horrible advice. And I couldn't walk away from that. I'm like, that's such bad advice. Like, Andy, don't quit your job. Like, wring every ounce of money you can out of this job, save it, get an education or something, go do something else, but do not open a stereo store, especially because he's selling all of his like beloved items for to do that. So
collectibles.
What do you think Andy ended up opening up his stereo store?
I don't know why they didn't know that. Why did the Trish character not realize? They directly reference iPods in this, which is kind of the beginnings of the stereo getting replaced. Later on it'll be by your phone.
Yeah, I had an iPod by this point in real life.
Yeah, I think I did too. Yeah.
And I was a late adopter.
Yeah, I was too. I was a little late on that, maybe 2 years
I was so excited. Oh my God, I was so excited, dude. It was awesome.
It was so such a game changer. It didn't last that long because the iPhone came in, the smartphone came in, but yeah, it was exciting while it lasted. And of course there were different evolutions of that thing, but they actually do something funny in this where they directly reference the VCR, even the VCR DVD combo, as being dated, but they don't realize. So they knew enough to be prophetic about that, but not enough to know that the stereo. Let's sell your entire collectible collection to the tune of $100,000 to $500,000, and then we'll open up a stereo store.
Yeah, like you sold all your beloved items. Your heart's definitely not in doing it, and then you use the money and lose it and squander it on a stereo store in LA.
6 months left for stereos at that point. 2000.
Great idea. And then I was curious. I don't remember this bothering me, but this actually bothered me at the end. There's a scene where Trish is basically thinks Andy is like a serial killer. She's in his apartment. She broke into his apartment, or just went there on it. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she has a key. And she's there judging him and asking what all these things are. And then she like runs away from him and like treats him like he's a serial killer. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I didn't remember this like chase ending where he gets launched through the billboard and all that. It's funny because I like this. It's like, get the fuck out of the road, virgin, which is like such a funny, that's almost like an Adam Sandler send up, that kind of quote, like that kind of thing.
It really is.
But yeah. So I'm wondering what you think of that. Like, why did they do that to Andy at the end? Like, because in reading a little bit about the film, I think they didn't want him to come off like he couldn't get women. They wanted him to come off like he didn't get women.
Right.
And they kind of tried to tease that multiple times, even showing him shirtless. He seems to have decent fashion sense. There's like weightlifting equipment and stuff in his apartment and all this different stuff. He obviously takes care of himself. He bikes and does all this. So I just thought that was kind of a weird move to like marginalize him at the very end just for a minute, make it seem like she thinks he's a serial killer. So right. It was just stupid.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird decision. Like maybe he is kind of weird because he's collecting toys and he's preoccupied with all these kid-like things. It's like all of a sudden reversing everything you've been saying or alluding to with this character. There's another weird thing. I mean, I love what you said about the Adam Sandler comedic stylings seeping in a little bit too, especially with the physical comedy and the silliness. which is certainly a good point. And it definitely does happen towards the end of the movie. But they do another weird thing where I feel like they were at first saying like, look, here's this guy. He's just kind of always been preoccupied with these things that we see as childlike, collecting toys, keeping them in the package, painting D&D figures, being obsessed with sci-fi and fantasy, all these things. First of all, that's another thing that hasn't dated well, because now it's perfectly acceptable 20 years later to be somebody like that. You could still be married, have kids, have a successful career, an income. You could be sexy, you could be stylish, and still be that thing where 20 years ago, I guess I would argue 20 years ago this existed and maybe this was a dated notion, but they're saying 20 years ago, if you were like this, you weren't going to get laid. That's the overarching message here. But I felt like they were saying that, but then in the flashbacks, which I like in a way, what they were saying was that he tried to have sex. You know, he was going to get blown by the girl in braces, or he had that one experience with the girl sucking his toe, but it just always seemed to go wrong. So he was put off sex, and as a result of that became preoccupied with, or doubled down on his childlike interests of collecting toys and being into sci-fi and being into nerdy stuff. Where I feel like, what are you saying then? It's a little bit of everything. Just say, you know, I feel like it would be funnier if it was just a guy who kind of got lost in his hobbies and just maybe throw cosplay in there or something, whatever it is, to just make sure you're hammering down on the issue. But then saying like he never really kind of embraced relationships or sexual pursuits because he was into these other things. He was a 40-year-old nerd, right? He was just a dork. He was a geek. But what they're saying is, no, he tried all that, and he just felt like being a hobbyist, being a pop culture zealot was kind of a more desirable route because it was just safer or whatever. So it feels like a little muddied, and maybe they had all these things in the cut or in the script, and then it kind of got a little diluted and a little bit too mixed around, or I guess muddied in the editing or something. But it is a little strange, you know. And then you kind of making the Trish character, who I gotta say, Catherine Keener, she's an interesting one, because not only does she have those dramatic chops and come from that background, but I think of her in roles like being John Malkovich, where she's kind of like the object. She's the love interest. She's kind of the girl who's out of reach. She's the hard to get, sophisticated, almost mean-spirited girl who you're never going to get, and she's going to remind you of that. I've always had that association with her from probably that movie, where she feels intimidating to me. She feels like girls I knew at certain points in my life that were those girls who you knew you weren't going to get, and they kind of were not afraid to let you know it. You know, not that they were like all style and no substance or just beautiful. Like, they were smart and beautiful and out of reach and intimidating. She always felt like that to me. In this movie, she's actually very charismatic and very appealing, and seems like she has a good head on her shoulders, and she's interesting because she's kind of like the hot grandma, and she seems very approachable. But then in the end, it's kind of like taking a different turn on her character. It's almost like you're not really honoring what you were telling us for the first hour and a half of the movie, which seems kind of strange. Seems like kind of betraying a good character and a good portrayal of a good character, which is kind of weird. Not to make too much of it. It's a comedy, but it does feel like you're kind of tweaking the character. You're kind of breaking the rules a little bit with what's going on at the end. Maybe just in order, maybe the whole object was to make Steve Carell fly through the mobile billboard, and that's what you had to do. But
right.
It seems off. It seems like a bad decision.
Yeah, it's strange. I just thought it was weird. The one last thing I wanted to ask you before we go into scenes and quotes as we wrap things up is, and this is something I did want to ask you. What do you think about work friends? This is a lot about work friends, and work friends were like a really relevant part of my social experience in my 20s. Actually, my entire circle was work friends. It was very weird for me I had my friend Kevin, who I went to Northeastern with. He lived in San Francisco, so there was like that connection. And I dated a girl for a little while through him, and so she was kind of unaffiliated. But when you think about some of the girls I dated, all my friends, people I played poker with, people I used to go to games with or whatever. It's like all work related or industry related people. And that's just a fact of life, I guess. And I when I started working from home, my social life deteriorated to nothing. But the thing is that I don't really care. I mean, that's kind of the fucked up thing, is that I know some people get lonely and need that kind of social connection. But for me, I like few intimate connections with people. And I typically like having them one-on-one. I don't like mixing my friends groups up and having people around each other and stuff, because I feel like I like getting like what I like out of this person. I like getting what I like out of this person. I think it's kind of reciprocal. But so I don't have that anymore. I'm close to the people we work with now, but we don't live around each other. I assume if Dustin was here or something, we'd probably hang out, but pretty often actually. But what do you think about work friends and the idea of work friends? Good or bad?
Yeah, I think it's good. Especially when you're young. I was really channeling my younger self in this. I know, of course, Andy is 40 and our trio of David, Jay, and Cal are like probably pushing 30. But I was even thinking back to my high school days where my first work friends, some of my contemporaries like around my age, sometimes even from my own school, I would work with at the supermarket or the skate shop, some of my earlier jobs. But what I loved in the beginnings of that, from like 16 to maybe 20, were the work friends that were slightly older to maybe a lot older, where it would be the older kids, maybe in their early 20s, to like the guys that were in their 30s, maybe even some of them were married. Because for me, especially in the supermarket, that was storytelling time. Like I would listen to these guys tell stories, not only about dating and their sexual pursuits and all the raunchy shit that goes on in the back room or the break room, but just everything, just talking about their lives, whether it was things that were, things that they liked on TV or racing cars or the sports that they played or whatever, fighting, going out to clubs, whatever it was. That was always something for me, where some of them, the cooler ones, would take you under their wing and then impart their wisdom or just make you laugh. So I always loved that. And it always seemed to me like work, it's the same thing as having neighbors or going to school. Like you're kind of thrust together by chance. And it's always interesting to see which people you're sort of drawn to, that you become friends with, and which ones, become mere acquaintances, and the ones that you just never hit it off with. And that's always an interesting alchemy for me. And something I've always had my whole life, in and out of animation studios. And now, working remotely, it takes on a whole different look. I just, right before we started recording, I was telling you I was in a meeting with my art director and a couple of other designers that I work with at the studio I'm at the moment. And it's another opportunity, even though it's a Zoom call, it's another opportunity to meet people that do what I do, whether they're just out of school or they're, veterans of the industry of animation like I am. It's really neat. And even in those early Zoom calls of being at this place for the first time, you could see the people who you could already know after one or two calls, the people that you're going to hit it off with and the people that you're probably going to be less inclined to embrace as friends, just because the personalities are already sort of forming, and how introverted or extroverted they are, how friendly, or how conducive their personalities are to criticism, whatever it is, right? Their overall sort of demeanor, all of that kind of stuff. It's interesting. I see it going on now with Lilia, my daughter. She's 16, working her first job. A big part of where she worked was kind of, and she was very honest about this, was kind of a social thing. She didn't want to do certain things for a part-time job because she wouldn't have the benefit to sort of be with people and enjoy the experience, right? She didn't really want to work retail on a sales floor because she felt like that would be too customer facing, where she wasn't really going to be associating with the other employees. So she chose really carefully where she wanted to work because of those social things. And I was proud of her for that, because I'm a little more introverted than that. But it's always another avenue, whether it's a job we're going to have for the rest of our lives or the little part-time jobs we have as young people, where you meet people and it's such a cool kind of cross section of personalities, people coming from different walks of life, people with different stories. I always dug that. Even though I was a little more introverted and shy, I always loved meeting new people and making new friends, and sometimes people that you still think about, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years on. So it's really cool. And even I with this movie in particular, I was thinking about the jobs that I worked as I put myself through college in Philly in my early 20s, because it seemed the most like that, where your work life, and this might have been really more also for being in a city, an urban environment, but it seemed like your work life was directly tied into your social life. Like those friends, especially the good ones, would be the people you're hanging out with outside of work, maybe going to a bar, going to a club, socializing at someone's apartment. So your whole, at a certain point in your life, it was, for me, it was in college, especially, where that work world was directly associated to what I would do outside of work. And it was all kind of bound up together, where I feel like when I got a little older and I was out of college and in my proper career, things were more independent of each other, right? You had your social life, you had your life inside of work, and maybe they were kind of tethered together, but it was a more loose association with, it didn't have to be, your social life didn't have to spring directly from your employment, where when you're in high school and college, it tends to. And that movie really made me think of this and kind of made me laugh at the character, dude. So many characters in my life. Shout out to Raz, this like Italian, very Guido dude that I used to work with in the produce department on Long Island, because this dude had a story about girls, not weekly. Every time I would see him on a shift, he had some kind of, like raunchy, just like, he was not shy about talking about his experiences, to the point where I was like, is this guy on the level, or is he, is he telling me tall tales? Yeah. I'm not sure. Shout out to Raz.
All right, I want to get through a few of these things, and you can obviously go through some of yours as well, because a lot of my notes are just quotes that I love or scenes that I wanted to shout out. So I love this story when you first meet Seth Rogen, and he talks about how he went to Tijuana to watch a woman fuck a horse, and how he goes in there, he's like, we all felt bad for her, we all felt bad for the horse. It's so funny. Like, that is, and I know that there's like some controversy around the early screenings of this movie and how people are like, this movie is so profane for no reason. And I can see that's like one of the first things that happens in the movie. So I can see that. I wanted to give that a shout out. The Michael McDonald DVD thing is like so funny. That whole bit is so good. I will kill everyone in the store. That whole thing. Sometime not in long ago. Ramon does a really good impression of him. So I want to give that a shout out. The whole putting the pussy up on the pedestal thing is like, that's a famous part of this movie. So I did want to acknowledge that, although it doesn't maybe age very well. There's a scene with Jay that I think is hysterical, where it's almost subdued, like where you might not even realize it's funny, where he talks to me as like, yeah, I think you're a good looking cat. Nobody knows it and no one can see it. Like he says that. It's like so good. It's like a really, really very funny, understated part. Wanted to give that a shout out. The waxing scene is hysterical. Clear all my appointments in the afternoon. It's like such a funny line. And I remember that being like a big part of the ad campaign for the movie. Elizabeth Banks and the scene in the bookstore when he's only asking her questions is so funny. That might be one of the funniest bits in the whole movie, because she plays so well in that part, as she's getting like more bubbly and like more excited and I guess turned on. And so I wanted to give that. And then Seth Rogen says something like, you wait for it to grow into a plant and then you fuck the plant, or whatever, when he's talking about planting the seed. So I love that scene. I wanted to give that scene. I love when David drops off all the porn for him. Oh, and when he's leaving, he's like, for the last time, I don't want to watch School of Cock with you. It's like such a thing my friends and I probably would have done to each other back in the day, to embarrass your people in front of your neighbors. So I wanted to give that a shout. And the whole porn scene with the candles, that's all really funny. And I didn't realize this because this might be the first time I've really seen the whole, like the extended version, is that Stormy Daniels is the porn star.
Yes.
In that porn scene, which is really weird.
Is that crazy?
Yeah, it's just interesting because she had a lot of unfortunate work done, I think. Like, it's not just aging, she did something to herself, because she looks totally different in this. And then there's this funny scene with Rogen when he's at the house and he says, "Is that the $6 million man's boss? Why do you have that?"
That's a great way to say
it. And then finally, the Age of Aquarius dance ending, very weird, very surreal,
strange.
And I forgot about that. And it seems like it's like almost out of Anchorman, which would make sense. Apatow, of course, produced Anchorman, but it almost seems like that level of surreal.
Yeah.
And like them, it's like in Anchorman when they get together with the other anchors and fight each other, like that level of surreal.
It is, yeah, very Anchorman flavor. Yeah, this was after the first Anchorman. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's a strange choice for an ending. It seems, I like the randomness of it, but it feels so tacked on. I know it's supposed to be like some triumphant kumbaya moment. This thing finally happened. It's a new beginning. It's the dawn of a new age for the Andy character. And the funniest thing I heard about it was that, and shout out to Jonah Hill, who I love, but somebody was saying in an interview that Jonah Hill actually passed out of heat stroke while recording the sequence, because he does a little dance and he's wearing like this heavy Mexican poncho and a knit hat or something, and they were in Temecula or something filming it, and he actually passed out while they were filming it, which I thought was funny. But yeah, I didn't remember the ending, and I don't know if it goes on a little too long, but it didn't sit well with me. I was like, they could have ended this differently.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird, strange ending, choice. And speaking of Jonah Hill, he is really funny in his bit in the eBay store with the boots.
He's awesome.
Miss.
I love that dude so much.
His delivery is just so. He's like a really, really, really funny guy. I like him a lot. In that whole group, I think he's like my favorite.
Yeah. You know?
He's lovable. And he's like totally a different person now. He's like totally changed, lost weight.
He's a different
men have
dude.
A second act. I'm telling you, men have a second act. It's unfortunate for women, but men have this second act.
They do. Yeah. He certainly is. Yeah, with all the stuff he's doing now, and it started with Wolf of Wall Street with him, where he's another one who showed he could do. You know, he had the dramatic acting chops, and then
I love that movie.
His turn as a director and the documentaries he does and stuff. Yeah, he's
Fun Tickets. Yeah, I love that. I love that movie so much. I think that movie is so good. I've said before that I saw it was when we quit IGN and we were waiting to launch Kind of Funny. So like in that holiday 2014 period.
Yeah,
I rented Interstellar, that movie, and Gone Girl, and watched them back to back to back.
Wow,
and I argued, I was like, that is the strongest 3-movie sequence I've ever seen in my entire life.
Hard to beat.
Dude, Gone Girl, by the way.
Ingenious.
That movie, I'm so glad no one spoiled it for me, and I would never do that to someone else. I had no idea.
No clue. I had no clue.
No idea. I was like, wait, what?
That's one of the weird movies. I was going through a really weird Ben Affleck stage where I was like, I don't like anything this guy does. I don't know why, because I love Ben Affleck. But
yeah, he's interesting. He is interesting, though.
Helene was the one, on a rare occasion, to turn me on to that movie. She's like, you need to watch it. Maybe the only time Helene's ever turned me on to a movie that I would have probably missed. And yeah, shocking ending. That's a lineup. That's a 3-movie lineup, my friend.
I was like, wow, do movies ever get better than this? Because it was. Because Interstellar is maybe my favorite. It's either my favorite movie in my heart is Willy Wonka. My favorite movie in my mind is Interstellar.
Yeah, you always say that.
Yeah, it's hard to know where to go from there. But Dave, talk to me about anything you want to wrap up. Any scenes you want to call out, quotes, anything you have written down that you want to give a shout to.
I think my favorite moment in the movie, if I had to pick just one, is the box of porn. When the what's his name? Paul Rudd's character.
David.
When David leaves and he leaves Andy with the box of porn, and Lionel Richie's Hello starts to play, and Andy goes into the other room and lingers on the shot, and then he peeks back into the box. He peeks around the corner, the doorway to the box. I just love that shot so much. It makes me laugh so loud. It doesn't involve dialogue or anything crazy. It's just him peeking back at the box like, all right, baby.
And he turns around the picture frames and all that.
It's which is so good. That's one moment, though, where I was like, they kind of did it. I feel like they could have done one better with that. He should have turned the 2 picture frames and then the action figure. I don't know why the action figure would have been in the middle.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Do picture frame, then action figure. That's funny, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that was, a Dracula figure or whatever that was.
It was just so funny. So stupid.
Good. Again, though, like those authentic things that like you remember being a kid and being, like you can't have anything looking at you, even a magazine. Like you got to flip that over. Like you can't, it's like it's relatable. It's goofy, but it's relatable. I love that moment. I love what you said about Michael McDonald. Is it possible, even at this state, I guess even in hearkening back to that time, is it possible to like Michael McDonald unironically? I'm not even sure. Like he's one of those, he was like even before Rickroll, right? Even before, who's that? Rick Astley?
Rick Astley, yeah.
It's like you can't take the music or the catalog or the art at face value because it's become such an in-joke in pop culture. I kind of feel bad for Michael McDonald, but it's just a thing. Yeah,
he is interesting. Yeah, because everyone knows that voice.
So distinctive.
Back in long ago. And his stuff with the Doobie Brothers and which I think that is a Doobie Brothers song actually.
Oh, is that really?
And then all of his own work and his appearances on other people's work. Yeah, he is a bit of a character. But yeah, do people go to Michael McDonald? Like, I want to go see a Michael McDonald show? Probably. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to exist. And there's probably, even though it's hard to imagine, there's people that are not in on that joke. Even though, again, it's hard to wrap your head around that because it's such a meme at this point. It's the Michael McDonald thing, that even goes to Office Space, right? Or is that a different?
Yeah, I don't remember. Let me look.
One of the main characters.
It's isn't it Bolton?
Oh, that's Michael Bolton.
Michael Bolton.
I'm getting the two conflated now. I'm getting the two confused.
Michael Bolton, and that guy hates him. Like hates Michael Bolton.
I think I have a different moment and a different quote for each memorable quote or a different favorite scene for each of these characters. But I love Mooj and Jay. They have two arguments that are hilarious. Again, you brought up early on in the discussion with the knife. He has the knife in his boot and it's got to spill blood before he can put it back in its sheath, whatever. And I love the way that argument just rises to this fever pitch and then they just end up hugging and like, all right, chill out. You know what I mean? Like, I'll do it. Like, whatever. That's so funny. The Mooj character just steals the show. Like anytime he's on screen, he's hilarious. And of course, we mentioned before Jane Lynch's character singing the little Mexican song about the gardener that apparently took advantage of her when she was a kid. And somebody told me, I don't speak Spanish, but somebody said she's just singing about when the football game's going to start or something about, but it sounds so sweet. Which is hilarious. And I want to give a shout out to the Jonah Hill moment with the shoes, the eBay store moment. That was amazing. And the two quotes, I think this was, which character was saying this? This was Cal saying, my grandmother looks like Jack Palance. Which is so good. And the Mooj character, they're talking about the size. They're looking at the sonogram, right, of Jay's soon-to-be son. His unborn son, and the Mooj character says, my sister's dick looks big on a 60-inch TV.
He also says something like, is he born on parole or something like that?
The little digs and the one-liners. Again,
the one-liners are great. I love the one-liners.
The infighting. It's so great, man. It's amazing. And also like the bag of sand, like that poker game that they entice Andy to attend or whatever. Not only the bag of sand comment, which is so funny that that's the red flag for them. They're like, wait a second. You know what I mean? I just think of Indiana Jones weighing the bag of sand with the idol. But Paul Rudd, when they're all talking about like these raunchy, sort of dicey sexual conquests, and Paul Rudd goes off on that romantic soliloquy or whatever. They're just like, dude, what the fuck?
Yeah, and that's very relatable. Like everyone's, I don't know. I was caught up on a woman probably once that I shouldn't have been, that I dated for a very brief amount of time when I was in college or something like that. And then everyone knows someone who's done that as well. So he's like, his character is like almost the most relatable in some way, that David character, even though it's probably the least funny of the characters.
Yeah, he's damaged goods. He's obsessed.
He's just totally
and
fucked up.
He doesn't, but we all know a friend like that who just doesn't share right. It's like they're not in tune with the mood of the moment. It's like he's
like, why the fuck are you saying that?
They just don't know.
And they're talking about women's nipples. Like, again, I love the idea of like the National Geographic nipple or whatever. It's so fun. There's so many funny throwaway quotes in that poker scene for sure. Anything else?
I've just heard that it's so relatable, just the level of raunch that I've been subject to, those conversations. It seems like definitely taking a page out of the things I've had to sit through or been a part of. Again, just the genuine nature of people talking like that. And also like just the way, yes, this smart tech is kind of a mashup of Best Buy, Circuit City, Sharper Image, whatever type of thing. It's kind of a combination of all those things, but just the whole thing with the workplace, like the tucked in polo shirt and the khakis and the weight belt and the lanyard with the badge and the back room with the oversized plastic jar of pretzels with the red screw off lid. Like, why did it just seemed like this movie's hilarious, but it almost gives you that feeling in the pit of your stomach. Like when you're 19, you got to go to work, got to go to your shitty part-time job. It's so realistic in a weird way. Everything about this movie, although it's so goofy and over the top and funny, it speaks to me on a level of relatability that almost doesn't make sense. And I think it's the people, it's the setting. Again, I grew up in the Northeast. I didn't grow up in San Bernardino or Glendale, wherever this is supposed to take place, in the valley somewhere. But it just feels like my younger self and the people I was around. And I think that's what makes it. That's why I love Superbad too. It just felt like being a kid. We weren't that crazy, but we definitely went through those experiences, maybe slightly more watered down versions of those experiences, but slightly, certainly we shared those things, those rites of passage and all that kind of stuff. This movie just feels like that. Again, though, I think what you said really hits home, Kyle, earlier. It's not as funny pound for pound as you remember it. There are lulls in the humor where maybe it gets a little bit, the comedy tapers off and those memorable moments, you're kind of waiting for the next peak. But it got me thinking too, it would be nice to see a comedy. This maybe speaks to more of the Adam Sandler formula, if I'm remembering correctly. There's something in a comedy like this where I don't want it to kind of journey over into drama. I don't even want that, the sort of heart-wrenching moments or the story. Like, just give me the comedy. I don't know if that speaks to like an older formula that just doesn't exist anymore, like a Caddyshack type of thing or any Rodney Dangerfield joint. But I just feel like I get a little bit annoyed when it starts to take itself a little too seriously, or it starts to say, oh yeah, but there's a story here going on, or it gets a little sweet or sentimental. Do you feel the same way about this kind of thing where you just want an unapologetic comedy?
Yeah, in some way. Caddyshack's a great example because Caddyshack really doesn't ever take itself seriously. In fact, as we talked about when we did that episode years ago, is that they rewrote a lot of the movie on the fly, realizing that it shouldn't be about the kid at all, but about the adults, which made it even crazier. And you think about all the scenes where it's like, Rodney Dangerfield like throwing his money around, and all the one-liners where it's like, he's like, buy yourself, he's like giving money to the bartenders, like buy yourself a haircut, buy yourself a, he's just giving like all these different things. This is my friend Wang. No offense.
Yeah, because they're funny characters.
Yeah, because it's just, you got to keep it going. Like that's what you're in for with these movies. So yeah, they kind of maybe needed to know their place a little bit better in that. That's why I think even at 2 hours, 15 minutes in the special edition, it's like, it's kind of long. I mean, I don't think it needed to be that long, because you probably could have not cut out the comedy, but some of the quieter moments. It's fine. It's cool though. It's a great movie. Again, not quite as ball busting as I thought it was, but there are so many really authentically funny scenes. Like, highly recommended movie. And as I noted in the beginning, and I texted you, it's like, it's not all about the butthole pleasures at all. It's not about these rusty trombones and these dirty Sanchez and these Cincinnati bow ties and these pussy juice cocktail and these shit stained balls.
Shit stained balls. Shout out to Mooj, man. And you know what? Shout out to the Datapalooza sequence with the girl with her nipple out.
Yeah.
That's a sight gag that's pretty memorable just because of and again, it's not the gratuitous nature of it. It's more the awkwardness. I think this movie capitalizes on those awkward moments. Like the Paula character singing to Andy. It's the awkwardness of having to stand there and endure it. You know, you kind of feel your heart kind of goes out to him, and you almost adopt this, well, better him than me type of, what would I do in that situation? Same thing with the nipple out. He's trying to be sweet. He's trying to make eye contact. This girl's boobs popping out of her blouse. It's just funny because of the awkwardness of something that could, again, that speaks to my fear of like my little wiener hanging out of my pants zipper. That's a great fear of mine.
Yeah, that's a fear of yours.
These things could happen.
Well, I'm trying to see if I can. Yeah.
Don't let them bother you. It's okay not to have sex. Not everybody's a pussy magnet. You, what are you, 25?
I'm 40.
Holy shit, man. You got to get on that. Life isn't about sex. Life is about children. The passion.
Yeah.
And the spirit.
Yeah, life's about passion.
It's not about fucking and balls and pussy. It's about love. It's about people. It's about connection.
It's all about connections.
But it's not about tossing salad. It's not about cock and ass and tits and butthole pleasures.
It's not about butthole pleasures at all.
It's not about the rusty trombone and the dirty Sanchez. It's not about the rainbow showers and the camel toe slide and the Cincinnati bow tie, your Ray-Ban goggles or the hot car and pearl necklace or pussy juice cocktails and the jagged head dildos and the double-decker pussies.
Okay, double pussies and
the shit-stained balls and cum swapping and the hanging brain. It's not about the rattlesnake wiggle and the alligator fuck house, the donkey punch or the teabagging.
Mooj, just please stop.
Just relax.
That's the full cut, apparently, of it.
I never heard that.
Yeah,
that is hilarious. That alligator bit it's kind of interesting how they cherry picked from that. How did they do that? I don't envy that task.
Excellent editing.
It really was super.
It's so funny.
And
you can see he's trying to. It's all improv. You see he's trying to get it going. Like
so good, dude.
Because he repeats himself a few times, but then they get it going. It's so funny. So
I never knew that guy was a stand-up. I read briefly on his Wikipedia that he was a high school guidance counselor that ended up leaving for LA and to pursue stand-up comedy. And I watched a little bit of his stand-up comedy. It was okay, but yeah, his role and I know he's been in other things, but I think he was in Zack and Miri, actually, Make a Porno with Seth Rogen. And what's her name? Elizabeth Banks. But I think his role in this is just so good. You almost want to see sort of a, you almost want to see a spin-off movie with just this character because it would be amazing. Thank God we didn't get it because you could ruin it. But
it's frustrating that he's not like part of the group.
Yeah.
Like, why wasn't he just part of the group? Because they have that other have that other marginalized person like that Paul Rudd yells at outside, like, get the fuck out of here. But I like when that guy comes in later and he's like, "What are we, Al Qaeda?"
Very timely reference for that.
Yeah, it's good stuff, man. It's fun. It's a fun movie. I hope people take the time to watch it. I just rented it on Amazon, which was fine. But there's everyone knows how to find these things. You can find them anywhere you want.
It's a good time.
All right, Dave, let's end this episode of KnockBack like we do each and every week or every other week now with a dad joke.
All right, I got my dad joke cards here. Let's just shuffle them up and we'll choose one. All right, here we go.
It's like you're at Vegas at the the dad joke table.
That should be a thing. I think you have something there. Okay. We'll try this one out. This one, I feel like this one's, I don't know. We got to workshop this one. Let's see.
Hit me with
Kyle, I tried to catch some fog, but I missed. Not
so bad. Not so bad. All right, my friend. Well, thank you for taking the time today to talk to me.
That was fun.
40-Year-Old Virgin, 2005 film.
Good stuff.
Judd Apatow and company. Hope you had fun. We'll be back in a couple weeks for another new episode. Video game episode this time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm already ready to go, actually. So we're ready to go on that. It'll be a lot of fun. Until then, thank you again for supporting us on Patreon for early ad-free access and more. Patreon.com/laststandmedia. Could not do without you. Leave us nice reviews on podcast services if you listen to us there and you feel like you'd like to do that for us. We appreciate that. And of course, YouTube likes and follows and all that as well is helpful. But whatever you can do for us, we appreciate. Merch, laststandmedia.store, etc. and so on. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show is conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.